Hello, music lovers. Our story begins back during the dark days of the pandemic. Having plenty of spare time to play guitar, I decided I needed a modeling amp. I knew from past experience most practice amps have two sounds, clean and dirty, both of them usually terrible, but a modeling amp can model hundreds of amps, different pedals and effects. They're wonderful things. So a friend of mine recommended the Positive Grid Spark. It has Bluetooth so you can connect it to your phone or your iPad and select from many preloaded sounds. Then I discovered the Tone Cloud, which has tons more presets uploaded by other Spark users, from Metallica to the Black Sabbath sound. To the Eddie Van Halen Brown sound, but the one that really got me was called Gilmour. It was dripping with sustain, tons of reverb and delay. After fooling around with it for a while, it reminded me of the Black Strat. This iconic instrument was David's touring and recording instrument for most of the 70s. From the screaming solo on Money, to trading licks with the synth on Have a Cigar, to the funky rhythm sounds of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, this guitar is the lead guitar of my childhood. Well, the original sold at auction for over $3 million, and custom shop examples have been going for $8K plus. So what's one to do? I decided I wanted a guitar like this, but I'm going to have to make it myself for a much lower price. So for a starting point, I decided to use this Squier Mini Strat. I picked it up for $40 at a pawn shop. It was missing a tuning peg, had a bent saddle screw, and is covered in scratches and other miscellaneous marks and damage. But it's a great starting point for something like this. So we begin with our Mini Gilmour Strat by doing a complete teardown. Take the bridge off, remove the pick guard, the jack boat, get all the electronics off before you remove the neck. Makes it much easier to work on all the separate components and get you ready for replacements. As you can see, this being a pawn shop guitar, it was pretty grungy and well used. Lots of scratches from years of being hauled around. I like to clean metal parts with CLP. It was originally invented to treat M16s for the jungle in Vietnam. It does a really good job of getting rust off and lubricating things. Here we're taking the neck off. Get the screws out before pulling the neck straight up out of the cavity, or in this case, pushing down. And as you can see, as a common practice with the guitars built in China, Indonesia, Korea, they'll use something for a shim, in this case a piece of sandpaper. So to get ready for the new tuning keys, we'll need to remove the old ones. So you pull the screws out and strip them off there. And we'll also remove the string trees because they're going to be replaced. And we want to knock out the ferrules from the tuning pegs. So using a long Phillips screwdriver and a mallet, I went ahead and just knocked those out. Put it in the back and pop it through, being careful. There you go. Those all out of the way. You can move to reaming out the holes for the new tuners. I went to 10mm new tuners. Had some leftover Wilkinsons with these small jelly bean style heads on them, so I wanted to switch to those, but you have to open the holes up to 10mm. So did that, and then used a drill to chase the holes to make sure they were clean on both ends all the way through. Test fit, as always. Then had to fill the screw holes from all the old tuning pegs, which is pretty easy, using toothpicks or other sort of pieces of maple if you can find them, and some wood glue. Just put some wood glue in the hole and insert the toothpick. And then waiting a considerable length of time, 30 minutes to an hour, come back and simply break them off. You can see here, take all the rest of the pieces out. Being there was a little bit of leftover, I used a extra sharp razor blade carefully to go ahead and trim the excess off before I decided to move it to actually sanding that a little bit to try to blend the finish somewhat. So,
And there were several dents and nicks and scratches in the back of the neck, so using 600 and 1500 grit sandpaper, I went ahead and sanded the back profile of the neck to get the dents out and to sort of level. And again, did a little bit on the headstock, but was careful not to damage the logos. Don't want to scratch off the serial numbers. Proves where it is and who it is. So there, after getting a nice smooth new poly finish on there, I sanded it back with some 1500. It's very smooth. Everyone loves the feel of the back of the neck now. Moving on to our guitar's finish here, I decided I should wet sand some of the scratches out. Even though the original Black Strat was a working instrument for many, many years and shows its wear and tear, this was a little too scratch for even me. I wanted to bring it back. And considering that most Asian guitars have very thick poly finishes on them that can be sanded quite a bit before actually rubbing through, I went ahead and took a chance. So using 1500 grit sandpaper and a little bit of water, being careful because too much water is bad for wood. So that's why I kept going back and wiping it back. We basically sanded it until it was all dull and most of the scratches have been gone. Some of the scratches were too deep to actually sand all the way down. I would have sanded into the black. And in one point on the body, I did actually sand through the paint because it had a high spot. Being very careful on the armrest because of the curved nature of it. Go ahead and sand it back. Then using a buffer with a polishing pad and polish, it just takes quite a bit of work to actually bring the sheen back. Takes probably a couple hours in this instance of different polishes and polishing, but we use a #1 polish until you get almost all the scratching out. So you can see here, you can start to see a reflection, whereas before it was quite dull. And after you've polished it through with the #1 polish and get it somewhat reflective, you come back with a #2 polish, a micro polish, to get the rest of the scratches out. As you can see here, almost completely finished. And then we use a wax to remove it. Looking back, you can see this thing was very scratched and it's much, much shinier now. The guitar had a minor amount of shielding from the factory, but it didn't go all the way up to the top, so I went ahead and applied some more. It's very nasty stuff, the nickel-based shielding paint. Always wear a respirator if you use this stuff. And I always cheat a little bit and go up over the top so it'll contact the conductive material that you put on the back of the pick guard for a free ground connection. As you can see here, I went ahead and got it all the way up to the edges and made sure we had a good connection all the way around. We're going to strip down the pick guard now so I can make a tracing to send off to pickguards.com and have another custom pick guard built, because I found out that the Mini Strat doesn't have an off-the-shelf pick guard like a standard Stratocaster, so you have to get a custom one made for it, which isn't a big deal. It only takes a couple of weeks from pickguards.com. So here we'll go ahead and pull all the pickups and the old electronics off to get ready. And then I went to wd.com or pickguards.com to place the order and discovered this. They're not doing tracings at the moment. So other option was to paint the current pick guard. I sanded it back with some 600 grit sandpaper and used vinyl and fabric paint, which is a really good solid paint. The experience with it from cars is that it will stand up to quite a bit of abuse. So here we need to enlarge the holes for the new potentiometers. I'm going to replace the potentiometers with new 250K pots, and the tone potentiometer we're going to use a push-pull pot that allows you to have the neck pickup on with any other pickup combination, which was a unique thing that Dave had done to the original Black Strat. Here we see I'm installing the SSL5 Seymour Duncan, basically Dave Gilmour pickup. But for the other pickups, I decided to go with City Limits from Tone Rider, quite a bit cheaper than what was prescribed in the custom shop model, or Seymour Duncan's version of the pickups from there, and they have very similar sound. They're wound to be late 50s hot pickups, so I figured they would be a fine choice. The frets were in really remarkably good shape, so I decided I would just rock them instead of actually doing a complete sand and fret leveling. So here we have a couple of high frets. Go ahead and file those down. Keep checking until you get it. Never want to file too much off at once. So, and then after rocking and getting it level, a good fret polishing. So I took some 1500 grit sandpaper, used a flexible sanding block, I lightly polished the tops of the frets before using a crowning file to make sure they were all had a nice crown. So I know this neck is rosewood, and the original Black Strat had a painted maple neck when it was sold, and from a lot of the pictures, but also over the years he tried many different necks and had rosewood necks on it at different times in the past, so I don't feel at all bad about having a rosewood neck. Here we are installing the new tuning pegs. You have to line them up before you drill the holes for the screws in the back, so we can go ahead and install all the washers and nuts and then tighten them down. Being careful not to tighten it too much. The wood, the maple of the neck is soft and you can crush it quite badly. So then we want to line them up, so turning it over using a straight edge, we'll get them aligned up before we go and drill new pilot holes for the actual screws. Most of the screws are soft and small in nature and very easy to strip or break, so you always want to drill a pilot hole when you're reinstalling the screws for tuning pegs. Install the screws and get them tightened down. Before installing some new string trims. Went with the classic Fender ones here, the replacements. The price is good, they work well. Basically had to drill a couple of little holes for the locating pin, and then you put them in and tighten them down. Since the guitar had a shim in it when I took the neck off, and I had sanded the pocket a little flatter, I decided to go ahead and use a shim from StewMac to reinstall the neck. We put the neck plate on and reinstall the screws. You can see there's still some scratches on the back, but for the most part the finish is really nice. Kind of gives it that loved, lived-in look. So next we install the wire for the ground wire for the bridge and install the bridge. Want to make sure you get a good connection there. You don't want that to be a faulty connection, especially on a single coil guitar, because the feedback and noise would be outrageous if you didn't. So have to make sure and get the screws tight. I'm going to reinstall the jack now. You're going to fish the wires through the little hole, and then I filled most of the holes in the guitar where the old screws were with toothpicks and cut them off so that we could get new purchase, because several of the pick guard needed to be moved. It actually wasn't lined up well with the strings. The jack boat wasn't really centered well, so we needed to move it slightly. Here I'm showing the using a piece of tape on the drill bit to make sure you don't drill too far as we drill the new holes to recenter the pick guard in the correct place. Okay, and then soldered the ground wires and the leads from the jack to the potentiometer for the final connections. And install our pick guard along with new screws. The old ones were rusty and fairly stripped out in most cases. And after you get all the screws in, go around and make sure they're tight. Don't over tighten them. You can warp and distort the pick guard. I've seen that quite a bit. And we install the new knobs. I like to have the number 10 facing up to me when they're all the way up, so that I know that they're all the way up when I look down. And then install a new switch tip, and we're pretty much finished at this point. There you go, a little guitar with a big sound. Really not terribly hard to do. Could be done to any type of Stratocaster, from a copy all the way to a real Fender. The pickups make a really good big sound. Everyone that's played it has commented on the fact it doesn't sound like a small guitar. It plays like a big guitar. It's really kind of fun to play with the small neck, the ability to turn on the neck pickup at the same time as the bridge pickup gives a big full sound, which is an interesting kind of lead thing. Really enjoyed doing this. It was interesting to learn about Dave and what the Black Strat, what he had done to it over the years and the different types of modifications. So if you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you again next time.